as people risk their life coming here. They risk their life going with coyotes. These are young kids. We have kids as young as 8, 9 years old coming up to the border by themselves because their family's sending them because they fear for their lives. We have women and children fleeing with their kids in hand because they're fleeing for their lives through a system that has now become run by mafias and gangs, where you face the threat of being re-kidnapped as you're trying to cross the border. Just recently we were talking to a couple of the kids that came into our center. And these two kids said to us, yeah, we got to parts of northern Mexico, and all of a sudden the coyotes, our guides, turned us over to the Zetas, who then held us and said, unless you pay another $5,000, you can't be released, and call their families here. And so, at one point, after they'd been held without food and with very little water for 5 days, the Mexican military showed up. And he was in a group of about 8 youth, but overall, in this rancho, there was over 160 Central American immigrants being held. And they were ecstatic. The Mexican military is here. And the Mexican military came up to their cells and where they're being held and said, you've been kidnapped, haven't you? They said, yes, let us out. And they said, no, we're going to tell you, do exactly what your kidnappers say. And then they turned around and left. Those are the things that they are facing as they come up. Those are the fears in walking through the desert and coming through this path. And they're not doing this because they're gaming the system. They're doing this because they fear for their lives. In the core of their beings, they're fearing for their lives. And parents know that if their children stay in this environment, they will not survive. And so it's a choice between sending their children through these risks of kidnappers in the desert to come here, or staying home where they know they have faced certain dangers and a large certainty towards death, or being trapped in the gangs, or taking a path that they shouldn't be taking. And then once they get here, they're detained. I'm going to talk briefly just about what happens when the kids get detained on the border, and then Camille's going to talk about the women and children. And then we have some guests that are going to talk about their own experiences. When the kids are detained on the border, they're immediately turned over from Border Patrol to Health and Human Services, Office of Refugee Resettlement, who find a place for them in a myriad of juvenile centers across the United States. So you could be detained in Arizona and end up in Chicago. And one of the problems is, for many of these kids, they don't even know where they are. Then they have to find a number of somebody that they know here. And if their parents are back home, they have to find a family friend, a cousin, a brother. Sometimes friends they haven't seen, a brother they haven't seen for 5 or 10 years. Or even if it's a parent. We have people seeking parents that they haven't seen for 13 years to basically link up with that parent and have them brought back over here. They have to fill out a complex form listing all of their income, get fingerprinted. And one of the things that we're encountering recently is that the agencies are now requiring some of the electronic fingerprinting, even though we could get it done here in another means, and requiring families to travel to Chicago or Maryland. Okay, and those families to just travel there just to get fingerprinted so their sons or daughters or their cousins or brothers can get out. They're being paid by what I like to call the macro parasites on this side of the border. They're being charged $800 to $1,000 for that trip to Chicago to get fingerprinted so their family members can get released. And then, once they're released, say if they're down in Arizona, they have to pay for the plane ticket for their family member to come here, and the plane ticket for their social worker to come with them and then go back. So another $1,500, $2,000 in airfares. That's why when you spell this out, when you look at this and you look at one side of the equation, the money that's being taken from families in quotas in their daily businesses, what they have to pay to the gangs to survive, money that's being taken from them. They have the money being siphoned off from them on one end, and then on the other end, once they get here, through all the other methods of macro parasites and fees and everything that they have to pay, money siphoned off from them on the other end. And in the middle are these poor people that are being squeezed as they fear for their lives.